Hi, everyone. It's Andrea Edwards. Welcome back to part 2 of We Need a New Middle Class Dream. So this section is going to cover fashion, including fast fashion. And like the other sections, what I'm trying to do is illustrate the scale of the issue that we face. When we understand the scale, we can work out the solution. So that's what these sections are all about. They're all going to be different lengths and different focuses. I've got a few more industries to cover just to make the point, and then I'll do part 3 where we really go big picture. Just want to say thanks to everyone who's been checking in. I really, really appreciate it. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. If you've got any other ideas or if any of these topics really speak to you or you're an expert, reach out to me. I'd love to get you on one of my live streams or on my podcasts where we can dig deeper, because people need to understand this. And I think the problem that we've got at the moment is most people do not understand it. All right, let's get stuck into this next section. The luxury and fast fashion industries are both experiencing rapid growth, and that growth is not slowing down anytime soon based on figures being released. In this industry, there is continued focus on growth coming out of China, even though it's suffering from its own economic woes, as well as the rest of Asia, with India a hot new market for investment and expected growth. We must start thinking this through. It is already out of control and it's getting bigger. The damage should be unacceptable to all of us. Our desire for luxury goods is off the charts, and I don't know if you've seen it, but when luxury brands put up barriers to enter their stores, but it's really crazy to me. It's like lining up for a nightclub that's already empty. Anyway, we know why they're doing it. They're trying to control the amount of people in the room so that it feels like a more luxurious experience. And if you live in Asia, this is a very, very common sight, but it doesn't work for me. But if you are actually allowed into the store and you don't have to line up, you are competing with people who are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash for all these goods. Of course, this fake exclusivity is all part of them creating a desire in us to want their products, and we're being manipulated in every transaction these days, no question about it, right? But I suppose the challenge for luxury brands today is it's become accessible to so many more people. It's not exclusive anymore. Therefore, is it even luxury? All right, let's start with growth. And here's Statista's data for LVMH Group, which is, of course, Louis Vuitton, from 17 million euros in 2008 to nearly 80 million in 2022. That's 360% growth. So LVMH Group operates in several segments, including fashion and leather goods, perfumes and cosmetics, watches and jewelry, wines and spirits, and selective retailing. Some of the well-known brands you can see here, but that are owned by LVMH include, of course, Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior, Givenchy, Fendi, Bulgari, Tag Heuer, Sephora, Moët Chandon, Dom Perignon, Hennessy, and many others. I'm surprised by the amount of champagne that they own. I was also surprised to see that Tiffany was on the group. There you go. Here is the global luxury goods market from 124 billion in the year 2000 to 387 billion by 2023. And that's 212% growth, which is huge. You can see the statement of CAGR, which is 5%. So I'll just go back up and show you that. So the annual growth figure, and it's 4%, 5%, 10%, and it doesn't seem much, right? But what we're looking at is cumulative growth over a long period of time. This is where the problem keeps happening. If every business on this planet is growing at 5% a year, over 20 years, that is an extraordinary amount of growth and impact on our biosphere. So we've got to start paying attention to that. When it comes to luxury goods, we can't ignore the impact that China is having. The Chinese spend more than 145 billion on luxury goods in 2023, which accounts for 38% of the global luxury goods market. And this is happening while China's broader economy is struggling, and yet consumers are still splurging on luxury products. One example is Hermes recently reported a 13% jump in fourth quarter revenue in 2023, which was boosted by a 19% rise in revenue from Asia. And that doesn't include Japan, which is typical for this region. Ralph Lauren reported 2023 third quarter revenue, where the US was flat, but revenue from Asia increased 16%, with China's sales up more than 30%. And there is a new player in the luxury goods market, and that player is India's mega wealthy. According to Bain & Company, the luxury market in India is anticipated to reach 200 billion by 2030, growing to 3.5 times its current size. And you can see in the Chinese spent 145 billion in 2023, so this is 200 billion. Given the growing demand for luxury products and services in India, an increasing number of international businesses are eyeing the Indian market with positive plans to establish operations where, of course, they hope to flourish. The conclusion is that India is now the next big market for luxury businesses to focus on. This is demonstrated by the growing number of Indian customers embracing luxury in all its forms, whether it be in the form of personal luxury products like jewelry, watches, and shoes, or luxury experiences. Wealth in Asia is something many people outside this region probably don't really sort of understand. It's really quite extravagant. It's another level of wealth that you don't see often in the world, and it's celebrated, while the environmental impacts rarely get a mention. When it comes to luxury items, it can be bags, shoes, belts, keychains, sunglasses, golf accessories, pencil cases, clothes, you name it. You can buy it in luxury shops. But where does all the leather come from for this massive increase in luxury leather goods? Luxury brands have also been linked to deforestation in the Amazon, yet here we are, lapping it up at the expense of the very environment we need to sustain our lives. These brands used to be aspirational. It was certainly aspirational when I grew up. I suppose today it's still aspirational, but for billions more people. And that is a problem. Today, 3.8 billion people can afford these luxury goods. We can see that that isn't sustainable, right? Even the lower middle class people could afford to buy a luxury keychain from these companies today. And I haven't even mentioned the human suffering in the supply chain. Human slavery is also very prevalent in the luxury fashion world. And this is one of the things that always leaves me asking the question, why do we continue to support brands that do not care about the people making them, let alone the devastating impact on our environment? Why do we keep buying into this when it's obviously so bad for all of us and devastating for our future? That's one of those sort of things that I ponder over a lot, and I don't understand it. We've obviously been very, very, very successfully programmed. And this is even more so as I recently read on social media, and then I went and found the information to back it up, that we have enough clothes already on this planet to clothe the next 6 generations. I don't know, but it sounds like we've been pretty stupid to let this happen, don't you think? All right, so here's some numbers, with most focusing on the UK, but not all. So according to Curious Earth, we are consuming at least 400% more clothes than we did just 2 decades ago. The fashion industry is constantly advertising to us, telling us to shop till we drop, buy the latest new products, wear new, never be seen in the same outfit, buy, and we'll finally be happy. I don't think they're achieving the goal of making us finally be happy, do you? The fashion industry emits 1.2 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide a year. Now get this, this is more than the combined emissions from the global airline and shipping industries, and about the same as the total emissions of the UK, France, and Germany. Wow. Here's the kicker. Approximately 40% of clothes sold today don't ever get worn. The average UK wardrobe contains 152 items, with 57 of them rarely or never worn. So I'll say it again, 40% of the clothes we buy are never worn. That's shocking, right? Makes food waste look like the good kid on the block. Up to 95% of all textiles can be reused or recycled, and yet we send around 350,000 tonnes of clothing, which is worth 140 million pounds, to landfill every year, and that's just in the UK. Please don't throw your clothes in the bin. Find a next place for them. There are so many places where we can be donating our clothes, which doesn't end up in the bin or in landfill. But important to note that donating to charity shops isn't always the best move, because only around 25% of donated clothes actually get sold in the shops. And this is for a bunch of reasons. The clothes are dirty or torn, it's cheap fast fashion and no one wants it, and lots of other reasons. What isn't sold is sent to landfills in Asia or Africa. The massive amount of clothing landing on these shores has decimated native textile industries, and the associated waste is polluting rivers and soil. We must stop this waste colonialism, and it starts by all of us committing to buying much less, using it longer, repairing it, and making sure it is disposed where it can actually be used. 95% of textiles can be reused and recycled. So to me, there's no excuse for the amount of clothing waste that is ending up in our environment. We have options. Yes, we have to work harder, but we've got to make sure that we're doing what we can. During lockdown in the pandemic, with physical shops closed, online sales skyrocketed, and they continue to be high, but they did drop off since the pandemic finished. But what this has meant is that returns increased. That makes sense, right? I don't know if you've ever done an experiment of buying clothes online. I don't do it. It's not my cup of tea, but I did experiment a few years ago. They were shipped in from China. Unbelievably poor quality, fell apart so quickly. I just did it once to try it, and I'll never do it again. So if you've got an addiction here, please, it's time to address it, because it's not good for the environment or for your wallet for that matter. So with e-commerce, we've seen returns increasing, and this hit the headlines as companies were found to be landfilling and burning returns rather than processing them for resale. Unfortunately, the realities and the scale of the systems means this is often the cheapest and easiest solution. So ease and cheap. These are the two things that we've all become accustomed to. But ease and cheap is the problem. And that's one of those mindset shifts that we really, really need to get on top of. Moving on to fast fashion. So how quickly is it growing? Well, fast fashion is just going up and up, as you can see in this graph, which is well over double at 132%. I actually feel that this is underestimating the market based on a lot of the other data that I'm seeing, but I have to find one to sort of present the growth here. Fast fashion has an enormous impact on the Earth's biosphere, as well as immense human suffering and slavery in its supply chain. But of course, let's be clear, human slavery and suffering is in the luxury goods supply chain too. For fast fashion, we heard last year that there is a mountain of discarded clothes in the Atacama Desert of northern Chile, and it has become so huge it can be seen from space. And Africa has become the world's dumping ground for unwanted clothes. And whether it's because fashion brands are overproducing to meet the demands of modern trends, or us donating or throwing away our unwanted clothes, countries in West Africa are drowning under the weight of all of the waste shipped to their shores every single week. It's all ending up in landfill, because fast fashion is cheap. It contains fossil fuels, which means it contains plastic, as well as forever chemicals too, by the way. And that means it breaks down into microplastics and enters the environment. Here's that view of what the fast fashion dump looks like in the Atacama Desert in Chile. This is an image taken from space, and we all know that this must stop. The waste from the fast fashion industry is an environmental disaster, but it's not going to stay over there. Waste moves and infiltrates everywhere. And because it's also full of plastic, it breaks down, and that means even more novel entities in our environment, as well as the bodies of all living beings, including human beings. It's long past time that we address this. It's disgraceful that we allow this to happen. With fast fashion, whether it's the largest company, Shein, or the rest of them, and this obviously doesn't include all of the fast fashion companies, this is an industry creating enormous destruction in our environment, but we are buying it. In fact, we're buying more than we ever have, and this industry is ambitious and only wants to grow. 3.8 billion people buying more clothes than we ever need, wearing them less than we ever did, so cheap it falls apart quickly, made of fabrics that destroy our environment, and when we're done, which can be even before we wear these clothes, it's thrown up to end up in an environment, maybe on the other side of the world. But my friends, on this planet, there is no way. I really think the most shocking indictment on humanity in recent decades is we now treat our clothes like a disposable coffee cup. It's straight to the bin if it doesn't fit, because it's actually cheaper than sending it back. This feels like a really big disconnect for me between ourselves and the natural world. Do you feel that too? Interestingly, fast fashion isn't just impacting the environment or the people working in slave-like conditions. It's also impacting global supply chains. And that means that everyone has to pay more for essential goods, and it increases inflation. So I want to take you through this recent Reuters article because I found it incredibly insightful, and I'll put the link in the notes below. This is quite text heavy what I'm sharing here, but I always think for people who speak English as a second language, if they find my Australian accent more challenging to understand, it's useful to be able to read as well, especially for something like this. All right. So fast fashion is not just appalling for the environment, it's upending the global air cargo industry as they seek to woo customers with rapid transport times. Shein and Temu, and I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, it's the first time I've heard of Temu, send almost 600,000 packages to the United States every day. And this is boosting air freight costs from Asian hubs like Guangzhou and Hong Kong, which is making off-peak seasons almost disappear, and it's causing capacity shortages. The biggest trend impacting air freight right now is not the Red Sea, where the Houthis are bombing the ships. It's Chinese e-commerce companies like Shein and Temu. Temu ships 4,000 tons a day. Shein ships 5,000 tons a day. Alibaba.com, 1,000 tons. TikTok, 800 tons. And that means 108 Boeing 777 freighters a day. Crazy, right? Shein accounts for 1/5 of the global fast fashion market, and fast fashion accounts for half of China's total cross-border e-commerce shipments and takes up about 1/3 of global long-distance cargo aircraft. Shein and Temu's growth is squeezing out space for other industries on air freighters, just as global firms are scrambling to find alternative logistics options due to the Red Sea disruptions. And don't forget, we also have the Panama Canal is disrupted as well. So this is important. It's important for all of us because it increases prices for everything and also inflation. When the Suez Canal crisis hit, there was no capacity to be bought because e-commerce has already bought it all. Here's a chart from the article to give you a sense of the split, but equally looking ahead to 2027, Cheyenne will hit nearly 20% of the market. Inditex, which is in second, which might see a drop by 2027, according to this data. But the brands of Inditex are Zara, Pull&Bear, Massimo Dutti, Berkshire, Stradivarius, Oysho, and Zara Home. One of the impacts of this rapid growth in fast fashion shipping, the sudden spike in demand from fast fashion that began last year, has lifted air cargo rates from China and is raising concerns about longer-term capacity shortage. According to Cargo Facts Consulting, based on what we have seen, this model of airborne e-commerce is not sustainable, neither from a profit or environmental standpoint. Continuing with the key points in this article, and I hope you find it interesting. I find this sort of stuff incredibly interesting because it's such a big, complicated system. And when you've got pieces like this destabilizing the global supply chain, that's a big issue. And it's based on us and our fashion choices. So moving on, in its 2023 commercial market outlook, Boeing estimated China's air cargo fleet would more than triple to 750 aircraft between 2022 and 2042. More growth, not good. Temu at the moment is looking to lease 12 wide-body aircraft, and apparently it's hard to get them. It's also looking for sellers in the US and Europe to reduce shipping distances and delivery times to shoppers. Airlines and freight forwarders are also contemplating how much capacity to set aside for Temu and Shine's business as shipments and prices continue to fluctuate. And the other thing is fast fashion brands are causing a trade imbalance with large amounts of cargo leaving Hong Kong, but merchandise volumes being much lower on the journey back across the Pacific. And that's important, right? Empty ships coming back. My takeaways: this industry is clogging up our shipping, which means other items become more expensive and inflation increases, all while the environmental impact of the clothes from their fossil fuel beginnings all the way through to the environmental destruction caused. Humans working in slave-like conditions deliver these cheap clothes, which are packed in excess packaging for shipping, and then the emissions from shipping or flying them across the world, predominantly to Europe or North America. We can see this isn't compatible with a healthy planet, but we can also see that it's not compatible with a healthy society, because essential items are going to cost more, and for the poorest people on this planet, they're the ones that are going to suffer the most. Let's dig into some more numbers and getting back to sort of the environmental impact of fast fashion. And so here are 10 concerning fast fashion waste statistics from earth.org. So here you go, 92 million tonnes of textile waste is produced every year. Of the 100 billion garments produced each year, 92 million tonnes end up in landfills. To put things in perspective, this means that the equivalent of a rubbish truck full of clothes ends up on landfill sites every second. Yes, every second. If the trend continues, the number of fast fashion waste is expected to soar up to 134 million tonnes a year by the end of this decade. Number two, the apparel industry's global emissions will increase by 50% by 2030. So yes, you read that right, 50% by 2030. If a business as usual scenario prevails in the coming years, meaning that no action is taken to reduce fast fashion waste, the industry's global emissions will likely double by the end of the decade. Let's hope we wake up to this one and start taking some action. We need our governments being very aggressive here. And I think we need to, be looking at China, the Chinese government, to really get on top of this as well. Number three, the average US consumer throws away 81.5 pounds of clothes every year. In America alone, an estimated 11.3 million tonnes of textile waste, equivalent to 85% of all textiles, end up in landfills on a yearly basis. That's equivalent to approximately 81.5 pounds or 37 kilograms, so the weight of a golden retriever dog, as an example, per person per year, and around 2,150 pieces per second countrywide. That's a bit of a problem. The number of times a garment is worn has declined by around 36% in 15 years. So the throwaway culture has worsened progressively over the years. At present, many items are worn only 7 to 10 times before they are thrown away. That's a decline of more than 35% in just 15 years. So I really wear my clothes to death now, and I mend and fix them as I go, because I can't be part of this. I really can't. And I was, just like most of us have been. So, don't feel guilty about this. We've all been sucked in by it. But once you know better, you do better, right? That's the saying. The fashion industry is responsible for 20% of global wastewater. And this is a big crisis. So dyeing and finishing, the processes by which colour and other chemicals are applied to fabrics, are responsible for 3% of global CO2 emissions, as well as over 20% of global water pollution. Along with yarn preparation and fibre production, these two processes have the highest impact on resource depletion due to the energy-intensive processes based on fossil fuel energy. Number 6, it takes 20,000 litres of water to produce 1 kilogram of cotton. So besides being a huge source of water pollution, fast fashion also contributes to massive quantities of water being wasted every day. So to help you visualize this, 2,700 litres of water are needed to make just one t-shirt, which would be enough water for one person to drink for 900 days. Moreover, a single load of washing uses between 50 and 60 litres of water. We need to buy less, wash our clothes less, use them for longer, and be mindful of the impact, especially when water access is massively reducing worldwide. Number 7, 500 billion is lost each year because of underwearing and the failure to recycle clothes. The vast majority of clothes being tossed every year are not recycled. Globally, just 12% of the material used for clothing is recycled. Much of the problem comes down to the materials our clothes are made from and inadequate technologies to recycle them. So all those tech bros coming up with all these amazing solutions that aren't working, why don't we focus on this? It's a pretty critical area, don't you think? Just thinking out loud. Number 8, nearly 10% of microplastics dispensed in the ocean each year come from textiles. So garments are a huge source of microplastics because so many are now made of nylon or polyester, which are both durable and cheap, and that's basically fossil fuels. Each wash and dry cycle, especially the drying, sheds microfilaments that move through our sewage systems and end up in waterways. It is estimated that 500,000 tonnes of these contaminants reach the ocean each year. That's the equivalent to the plastic pollution of more than 50 billion plastic bottles. So that's a big deal, yeah? Number 9, 2.6 million tonnes of returned clothes ended up in landfills in 2020 in the US alone. Most of the items returned to retailers from consumers end up in landfill. This is mainly because it costs more to the company to put them back in circulation than to get rid of them. Reverse logistics company Optoro also estimates that in the same year, 2020, that was the year of the pandemic, right? 16 million tonnes of CO2 emissions were created by online returns in the US that year. And that's the equivalent to 3.5 million cars on the road for a year. So it's having a big impact. And of course, number 10, fast fashion brands are producing twice the amount of clothes today than in the year 2000. And we don't have twice the number of humans. So there's no justification for this other than a behavioral change for us, as well as obviously those businesses pushing us to buy more, right? So this dramatic increase in production has also caused an increase in both pre- and post-production textile waste. Due to the number of cutouts for the clothing, a large number of materials get wasted as they cannot be used any further, with one study estimating that 15% of fabric used in garment manufacturing is wasted. So you think 15% is wasted before it's even turned into a garment, and 40% of the clothes are never even worn. So if you're growing cotton, it requires a lot of water, and then all of the things that need to happen to turn it into a t-shirt. Or if you're wearing something made of polyester, which is basically made of fossil fuel, we've got to get the fuel out of the ground and everything that goes along with turning that into a fabric. And all of that waste is happening. It's like a double whammy, this waste, and that's the thing that we've got to get under control. All right, so let's have a look at our options. And remember, these are just my ideas. But I also think that some of this needs to be said out loud because we can't continue the way that we are going. The obvious place to start is growth is the problem. Both the massive growth we are seeing in the businesses making these items and all the negative environmental and social impacts it results in, along with our spending growth in buying clothes and accessories. Remember, we are buying 400% more clothes than we did 2 decades ago. And that's not because we increased the human population by 400%. It's because there are more middle-class people with money to spend. And obviously, clothes are one of the first places where we're going to spend our money. However, the wealthier nations are where the real spending is happening, as well as the trend of wearing it less and throwing it away, where it typically ends up in landfill over there. With that said, these industries are growing exponentially and no one seems to be able to stop it. Or there just doesn't seem to be any will to stop it. And we urgently need to address that. Governments absolutely have to step in because for the very few who are making money here and getting rich, it's costing all of us the planet. But we've got responsibility here and we have to take that responsibility on our own shoulders too. It's not somebody else's fault. It's all of our faults. So this is one of those ones that people aren't necessarily going to enjoy or appreciate hearing. Luxury is not possible if we want to live within the 9 planetary boundaries. And I talked a lot about that in the very first episode of We Need a New Middle Class Dream. I've been reading some recent research looking into how we can get the planet within the 9 planetary boundaries, including what we can have and what we can't. And it's very, very clear that luxuries cannot be part of that future, especially if we're looking at more the same sort of standards for everyone around the world. Now, I think this is something very important for all of us to understand and accept so we can move forward as a global community, because that's what we need to do. We need to be committed to a livable planet for all life on Earth, including providing a standard of living for all humans on this planet. All right, is it time to end the fast fashion industry if we want a future and a healthy planet? I hope that everyone now understands how detrimental the fast fashion industry is, if you didn't know before, of course. And that takes into account its business model, its advertising, and its impact on the environment, as well as the people working in the industry. This, to me, is what I call a bullshit industry, and it's time for it to go, or at least for now, to scale it down rapidly. The time for half measures is over. The only things that are going to make any difference now is acting at massive scale. And to me, this just doesn't have a place in a healthy future for humanity. This industry is not going to do it willingly, of course. Why would it? So what can we do? Let's stop supporting it for all of our sakes. Can we put limits on all fashion, especially luxury fashion? The fashion industry uses animal products like leather. To get that leather, it has responsibility for massive deforestation. Chemicals and microplastics are filling our water and land because of the fabrics used and chemicals added to fabrics like forever chemicals. It uses a massive amount of water in its production, and with so many wasted clothes, That adds up to even more water being wasted, not to forget everything else used in clothes and accessories that get dumped. And the people working in the industry are typically poor and work in inhospitable conditions, something that will get worse as the world heats up and extreme weather continues to have an impact. It's responsible for a lot. Perhaps we need to be thinking about putting limits, whether it is how much we can buy, what is a sustainable amount of clothing and accessories based on living within the planetary boundaries for 8.1 billion people, is a question to ask. Or do governments start to legislate? It's obviously easier if we make these decisions ourselves rather than being legislated, because that's going to create different problems, right? But no matter what way we look at it, this industry must shrink, and it certainly cannot continue with its extraordinary growth. Number 5, can we consider the workers in the global south in any decisions we make, moving them to more profitable, high-value work, for example? During the pandemic, the garment workers across the global south were completely abandoned by the fashion industry, and I mean completely abandoned. Orders sat unpaid and unshipped in ports across the region, and the women, because it is an industry where the workers are predominantly women, were left with nothing, which meant many suffered violence, sexual assault, and slavery, including sexual slavery. The people making our clothes are not thought of at all as we consume more and more, and that is a mindset that needs to change. We must open our eyes to the reality of what we are contributing to. We want cheap clothes, but we are not understanding that cheap clothes come at an enormous cost to the people in the industry and the environment. So if we move to less but higher quality, let's bring these ladies with us and give them a better life too. Let's not ignore and neglect them again. Number 6, just really extending on this. This is an industry of suffering, not just the environment, but the people working in it. Slavery is prevalent, child labour too. Do we care? Do we care about these people? Often on the other side of the world? Is it time we opened up our hearts and minds to create something better? In order to overcome all of the huge challenges the polycrisis is laying on us, the truth is we have to deal with how we treat all people and all nations on this earth, or we won't succeed. So let's make this a key part of the plan moving forward, making sure that we're taking care of the people who have the least and have contributed the least to the problems that we are facing today. All right, let's move on to rethinking fashion. So this is the bits that you and I can do. And I'll talk through some of the things that I've done and some recommendations. It's not going to be everything, of course. So number 1, we need to buy less, much less. And according to Jump Campaign, they're suggesting we only buy 3 new items of clothing a year. Do I hear a screech across the airways? Only 3 items a year is so little, especially when you consider we'd probably buy, at least that many pairs of underpants, right? So, but the real emphasis is much less, buy a higher quality, make it last longer, shop at secondhand stores, or join a local swap. And this is, of course, all the way through to using old clothes as rags for pets or donate to a sewing charity, animal shelters, and on it goes. The most important thing is we need to get our clothing waste out of landfills, and the place to start is to have less in the first place, but also to really think through what we do with any clothes that we want to get rid of after we've worn them to death. So I've been reading some recent experiments of people who have made a commitment to buy 5 new items a year, excluding things like underwear. It's been really interesting, and keep an eye out for these stories just to take some inspiration. So what happens is that people become really, really conscious of their buying decisions, and they don't waste money on clothes that they would throw away. So that's exactly where we all need to be. That really deep, conscious thought about making purchases versus just buying, 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 buying. Oh, it doesn't work, throw it away, right? Where that mindset is contributing to this massive problem that we've got in the environment today. So give it a go. Make a commitment. Only buy five new items of clothing this year and see what happens. And if you do it, make sure you share it on social media. Talk about it. Talk about why you're doing it. Talk about how it makes you feel. Talk about any things that surprised you. So let your community know. That's really important. That's a really positive contribution you can make because it helps other people to start going, maybe I can do that too. Because that's what we need to do. Ripple out, creating bigger impacts. We need to recruit 1 billion people making these sort of changes, right? So, but the fundamental is buy much, much less. We need to tackle addiction. This is a huge issue, and it's obviously not just for fashion. There are people all over the world, men and women, who are addicted to online shopping. So not only is it detrimental to their pocket, and people are going into massive debt doing this, it's part of some wider issues we need to tackle in our societies. And of course, we've got a lot of issues that we've got to address, right? But the ability to buy online has a very dark side. And because most of it is never sent back, it ends up in landfill. Or even if it does go back, it ends up in landfill. So it's kind of, no real win-win. But we've got to stop the impulse buying. So if you've got an addiction, let's tackle it. We really need to be setting up comprehensive mental health sort of programs across our communities around the world. And I think addiction needs to be part of it because it's online shopping addiction. I mean, we know gambling, alcohol, all those sort of things, but there's, social media addiction. There's so many different types of addiction now. So we need to tackle it. So that's another one. Number 3, we need to educate ourselves and really start to take responsibility. So ignorance, there's no excuse for it anymore. So 2 things that I recommend, you can use the hashtag or just do a search in Google. Search for End Slavery Now and Who Made My Clothes. So these communities track the environmental and human abuse in the system. And it takes just a little bit of effort to find this information. With our brands that we love and we buy from, we need to demand transparency from them. But we also need to work harder to find the information if it's not available right now. It doesn't take a lot of work. I spend a lot of time looking for this sort of information. It's there, it's easy to find. And we just definitely need to take more personal responsibility. If we're buying from brands that are doing harm, whether to the environment or to the people who work in their supply chain, then why are we still supporting them? If buying leather goods, buy vegan leather. And there are many, many options available today, more and more. Stella McCartney is a great leader in this space, and hats off to her for that. If you're in the market for something you need, dig deep, do your research, and buy earth-friendly products. However, we've got to remember that green growth is still growth. So it's always about less. It's got to be less, less, less all the way. If you are buying clothes, buy natural fibers, but of course, still buy less. Fast fashion and any clothes made from synthetics is made from fossil fuels. These clothes break down in every wash, leaching microplastics into our environment. So we talked about that a little bit before. Pure natural fibers are best, but not if you buy in excess, because even natural fibers have an impact on the environment. As I mentioned earlier, it takes 2,700 litres of water to make one t-shirt. And in case you don't know, it takes 7,600 litres just to make one pair of jeans. Very water-intensive industry. Number 6, repair, mend, make it last, set up a repair shop. It's time to relearn those sewing skills many of us picked up in school, but have probably forgotten, or to learn how to sew full stop. Find a local business that is teaching these skills. My friend Jenny Thorman in Melbourne is working for a business called Second Stitch, and it's a great example of helping people relearn these skills or learn them from scratch. And it's also a growing sustainable community. So they're doing some really amazing work. Wherever you live, if it doesn't exist, why not set up a sewing and repair shop? This is one of those many areas where we lost our skills and closed down these sorts of businesses because we started just throwing everything away and buying new, right? We need to get these skills back, and it needs to be cool. Number 7, push brands to take care of the environment and people in its supply chain, or boycott the brand. Why not? We can vote with our wallets, and we should. If you're buying from a business that is destroying the environment and your future, why? Why do you continue to support them? Just doesn't make any sense. Number 8, let's stop buying into this madness. It's destroying our ability to live on this planet. When people say we, the people, have no power and everything that's wrong can be placed at the feet of the big corporations, I'm sorry. These guys might own the business, but they are not buying enough clothing that we can see fashion landfills from space. That's on us, and we need to address our own role in this devastation. I appreciate it's not easy to face, but here we are, and it's time to clean things up, and we've got to start with ourselves. I think it's really beyond time for all of us to rethink fashion and understand its massive contribution to environmental degradation, as well as the other things that we talked about: human slavery, the supply chain issues, the waste it creates, the poisoning of our waters and our lands with microplastics and forever chemicals. I mean, this is an industry that is doing an enormous amount of harm. And while we're hearing and seeing some great work being done, it's not enough. It's not even nearly enough. And the really big players that are making the biggest contribution, they're not changing fast enough, and we need to make that happen. So let's make it happen. We've got to believe we can do it. Alrighty, thank you once again for checking in, this time for the fashion section. There's really so much more I could discuss here, but I highly recommend you follow sustainable fashion experts who are doing a great job raising these issues and helping to grow awareness. But we have to do our part here, and that part is a massive reduction in how we buy clothes, and we need to spread the word across our communities all around the world, in every language of the world. We have an overconsumption challenge. We are consumatrons, and we have a scale issue. And when we understand the scale, which is what I'm trying to demonstrate with this series of videos, we can also see that it's the solution. If you want to join the journey, come and find me on my Facebook group, 1 Billion People with Uncommon Courage. And let's come together to create a global community committed to action. 1 billion people active and driving change can create the human tipping point we need. Once we reach 1 billion people, we only need each person to recruit 3 to 4 more people each, and then we will be in a position to drive the runaway changes required. Believe we can do it, and let's get to work. See you next time, and I'm going to do a section on white goods. It should be a little bit shorter than this one, and I'm hoping that the rest can be a little bit shorter, but there's still some big topics that have to come up, like the waste industry. I'm going to finish with that one. Travel and tourism, we're going to have to talk about that one. And I know people aren't going to like that, but we have to talk about this stuff, right? But I'm going to do a few more of the sort of consumer areas, and then we'll get on to those. All right. Over and out for today. Thank you for listening.
Uncommon Courage.